And I think we're live. All right, YouTube, good to see you again. Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, whatever you want to say. Back here again with Duff. Duff, say hello.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Or however you disguise that, sure. All right, it's been a little while. We've had some things that got in the way, but we're back here going to give a Christmas special podcast for you all. And we want to start off the conversation talking about the big thing in the news right now. For those of you who don't know, I've been living under a rock for the past month or so. President Trump and the Republicans have passed a new tax bill that basically lowers taxes for overall everyone. And according to the big news outlets, mostly CNN, we're all going to die. And I think that's, a little bit over the top, but I don't know. We'll see what you think here. The tax bill, as far as I understand it, is a good start to changing how we are all taxed, including corporations and whatnot. They lowered the corporate tax from 35% to 21%, which is amazing, and we can already see all the goodness coming from that. I believe I saw Trump standing next to a few of the, or I'm sorry, mentioning a few of the improvements, and which would he mentioned AT&T and other companies giving a lot of bonuses to their employees. So I mean, already you're seeing big changes there. But of course, the Democrats say we're all going to die, and which is, sounds, I don't know how me getting more of my money, or let me rephrase, me keeping more of my money, makes me want to die, but not sure. But anyway, Duff, any initial reactions you have?
Well, it's definitely a bold plan, but not an unexpected one coming from a Republican president. The idea that taxes should be high is just as artificial as saying taxes should be low. The reasoning should be what we do with our taxes impacts our economy, and how do we want to impact our economy to ensure growth and continued sustainability and viability in the market. And lowering tax rates, especially when it comes to the corporations, seems to be a really good way of doing this. As Ben Shapiro keeps on pointing to, if we look at the European countries, they've been religiously dropping their corporate tax rates and seeing really good returns on their economic investment. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to pursue. I have a feeling there will be some problems, but that's for people of 2018 to figure out. But what are your thoughts there, AAA?
Yeah, I think that the majority. I mean, again, I don't think that there will be. I mean, there will be a lot of good coming from this. To keep more money for the government to leave me the more alone, I think is awesome because I like my money and I like to spend money the way I want to spend it, and that will be good or bad. But I mean, again, we've already seen several companies are investing in more in the company or giving more bonuses to their employees. I think Huntington or one of the banks actually mentioned raising their minimum wage from $13 to $15. So hey, Democrats, you won that one. And those, it just makes us more competitive. I've also been seeing some things where Europe is now getting afraid that the U.S. is becoming more competitive now, so they're going to have to kind of get back on their A game and whatnot. So I mean, a lot of good comes from this. I don't see why this is, the end of the world, and we're going to go and be against the rich, and why we need to go and take more of their money, which I just never got how, if I'm a corporation or a business that makes a lot of money and you take more of my money, well, then I can't give as much money to my employees. So it would make logical sense to me, if you leave me more with more money, I can give them more money. And I've heard the argument, of course, where, well, they might just keep it. But I've also been told by several of my friends or people who know others that are in big companies, one of the big fundamental rules of big business is the fact that if you're not growing, you're dying. And yeah, you can have the CEOs keep the money, but that might make you feel good, but in the end, you're really just hurting yourself. So I think if you're a big business, you're smart enough to invest the money appropriately, or you're gonna die. But and another mention too, in the bill, I've been told, or as I've researched, apparently there is or I guess Trump got rid of the individual mandate from Obamacare, so now he essentially ended it. So you can get it if you want it, but now you're not penalized if you don't. Which, I mean, two birds with one stone right there, the tax bill and getting rid of Obamacare, and that's pretty freaking amazing. Did you hear anything about that, by the way, there, Duff?
Oh yeah, no, I followed that. I'd actually like to take a step back though. So when we're talking about these companies giving bonuses to their employees, I do have the feeling that on some level it's thumbing their nose at the Democrats, and that's totally fine. But I think the other problem is the media is conflating two different things. So CEOs who sign off on huge bonuses are usually taking advantage of loopholes within tax legislation, not higher or lower taxation rates. So I would say within reason, it's a non-argument that's being put forward as an argument. Because assume if you have it on the books that somebody, if they have this much productivity, will receive a bonus for this much that is not held against their salary and in fact is granted at a lesser or at a different taxable rate. Of course, successful CEOs are going to be trying to give themselves more money within reason, especially when we're talking about corporations where some of the upper management don't actually deal with the day-to-day operations, but they do get to move around a lot of the liquid capital for the corporation itself. So that's a bit of a conflation, and I wish the media would get away from that. It's totally good to say, though, that we hope that corporate executives don't see this as windfall for themselves. But if more companies take the excess money which they have because they're not being taxed as much and put it back into their companies, that'll lead to job growth. So, it's win-win for Trump so long as everybody plays ball. And I think there's incentive for them to do so.
Yeah, it's truly really true. And I guess with that being said, do you think that since you mentioned the move there to kind of say, stick it to the Democrats, do you think that this bill being passed is going to have to have the Democrats change their mind and change their tune? Do you think that now the Democrats are going to have to say, oh, hey, we've been saying death, death, death. Now this next year will come, or do you think they'll be having to try to switch their story again and say, oh, yeah, well, maybe tax cuts are good. Do you think this really hurts them now?
Um, I think the problem is that both parties, to an extent, are so far removed from policy positions and actually understanding the mechanics of the policies that they're trying to enact, that their hands are kind of tied with their current leadership. So with Warren, with Bernie Sanders, with all these guys who are currently the head of the Republican sort of party and the face of the party, sorry, not the Republican, Democrat, they're stuck. So what they actually need to do is get people to come up and say, hey, we can understand that the economy can work well with more tax cuts, but we need to start making a stronger argument for the value of the service the government provides when we have higher taxation, and that it's actually better for more people. The problem they're going to have is whether or not the data plays out in their favor. Because if it turns out that private Medicare manages to take up the slack where public Medicare is failing in the States, then they will have no ground with which to stand on. And if it turns out that joblessness continues to go down at a far higher rate than it was under Obama or the Clintons, then they'll have no ground to stand on. So once again, they will switch over to more ideological arguments until they can get some new people in their leadership positions.
Interesting. That's actually, since you mentioned that, did you hear anything more about the new developments with former Senator Al Franken?
Well, he's still a senator for the next month, apparently. He hasn't stepped down yet. Yeah, no, I haven't
okay.
heard
No,
that.
I just heard recently he was trying to turn himself, or I guess there were four senators who said, "Oh, hey, you know what? Since Roy Moore didn't get in, now we want Al Franken back." So just funny to see how everything switched around when when I guess the Republicans kept the moral high ground.
Yeah, and that's once again, politics is always about expediency and what can somebody do for me now. And Al Franken is a known quantity, and he was actually really popular prior to the sex scandal. So the idea that they're trying to bring back a popular known quantity who is repentant for his activities shouldn't be beyond belief. But it sort of speaks to, let's say, the moral grandstanding which has been going on for so long. And as you said there, AAA, if we're talking about which party wants to seem more moral, by Republicans not coming out and voting for Judge Moore, they kind of lost the impetus to say, oh, look, we are the more moral and ethical party. And I hope that's actually something which continues to bite them. Because unless people are going to be moral and ethical, rather than say that they're moral and ethical, it really shouldn't be in the discussion.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I like I heard in a on Ben Shapiro's show, I liked what he said about I think that anyone who has sexually abused, harassed, or anyone that has done anything involving sexual crime, if you will, and that is currently a political leader should be cast out, fired, what have you, and get gotten rid of those because that should be the you are the moral arbiter, or that's a high office to be in, so you should be able to get out. And this is a great test, but that's the going on with that. Did you? I guess I'm assuming you heard Al Franken talk about getting rid of President Trump for the same allegations.
I've heard some of that stuff. So has there been some breaking news or a change in the story in the last couple days?
No, I was just I don't remember what we if we talked about that last time, but I do I was or I think Al Franken and a few other people were saying, oh hey, since all these allegations are here, then maybe we should get rid of Trump for all of his sexual abuse, and then the other side said, well wait, Trump said something, Al Franken did something, so should Al or and to the point of the American people knew that and they still voted him as president. So is that really a point to be had? But I mean, yeah, that's the I don't know. I guess would you find that to be a leg to stand on?
Um, it should be. Like it should literally be that you say, look, you are not necessarily the best person who could fit in the job. You've done some morally questionable things. But the thing is, according to the accusers of Trump, most of what he did is actually from at least a decade or more ago, if the allegations are indeed true. The problem is that nothing was made of these allegations back when he was a Democrat, and suddenly it's politically expedient to double down on it when he's a Republican. So that's the pot calling the kettle black. And so it's not really a workable argument, especially with Roy Moore not getting put into the Senate again because of what he did. So you can't actually say that the Republicans are being amoral or running contrary to their standards when the person that you want to bring down, aka Trump, did what he did or did what he's alleged to have done many years ago and under the auspices of the Democratic Party, yet try and pull him down by saying our senators are stepping down, but none of them are doing so, let's say, willingly, and none of them seem to be stepping down without political motivation or a push from other parts of the Democratic Party. So it devolves into a really big he said, she said, and ultimately it loses all of its impact because of that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And just to go off of that, you talked about it had been a decade. So in your opinion, if does the timing matter? So I mean, of course, it'd be easier if I don't know, let's say while we'll make it easier while a senator is being or going on a campaign to win an election, if there was some sexual harassment or abuse going on, and then the next day came out, it's still valid. But would you say that it is less to be taken less seriously if the accuser accuses whomever, 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now? Does that matter at all?
Hmm. Well, actually, I'll turn this back on you to start there, AAA. What are your thoughts on that? Does the time lapse matter?
I think that well, unfortunately, I kind of think the answer depends. I liked, again, Ben Schreier had a good line on this, and he just kind of said that if the facts are there and there's logical and legitimate proof that this happened, he talked about the accuser was giving details on where Roy Moore was, what they did, and there was proof of, yes, people confirmed that they were in this place, they were alone together. So there is some facts to go along with that. Now, of course, we weren't in the room when this happened, so I mean, technically speaking, yes, they could have been in the same spot, and nothing could have gone on, and she's making the whole thing up. And there were so many there. So, um, yes, I think if there is legitimate proof and witnesses or whomever to say, hey, you know what, this happened last night, this happened 5 years ago, this happened 10 years ago, I think it should be taken into consideration, but also it should be taken into consideration what actually happened. Was it, they said something, they did something. I don't think that those are on the same level of abuse. Of course, none of it is right, but getting, I don't know, catcalled or name called or whatever, as opposed to being touched, as opposed to being physically abused or assaulted. That is they're not the same thing. So I think that timing does matter, but hearing all about all these women saying, "Oh, hey, I uh, this the whomever senator or what have you came across to me and did this," and I felt at first it was okay, but later on thinking about it, it wasn't okay. I mean, it does make sense now that people are waiting because they don't feel it's right, but now like, oh, hey, it's they can become out to be brave, so it should be definitely looked at, and I don't think timing matters in that way. I think the only thing that matters is how legitimate the the accuser is and what they have to show for it. But yeah, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. So this is the tricky sort of house of cards which they've set up. Is if we're talking about sexually inappropriate conduct that is to the degree of sexual assault, should we always treat that as being worth our attention and prosecutable? For sure. Absolutely. The issue, though, is that these people have been put into these places of power with knowledge of what they are actually like. And for the, let's say, minimum level of entry, that doesn't seem to bar these individuals from running in these circles because they bring other intangibles to the table. So when it comes to politics, it would seem that the powers that be are perfectly willing to get a candidate with problematic sexual history so long as they're popular or speak the right words or represent the right positions. And they're not quite as worried about what the dirt could be raked up about them because when it comes to the media, they have a very short attention span. And they really don't seem to treat this equally on either side. So it's not something which should be happening. As I said, I don't think that people who have suffered from sexual abuse, from harassment, from anything like this are in any way wrong by coming forward. They absolutely should, and they should be listened to. But the problem is, this isn't a legal argument. This is a popularity contest. And for the people who have the power, the fact that these are known quantities, known celebrities, trumps the rights of the person who is alleging the assault. And this is true as far back as Bill Clinton kind of thing, right? And so it would seem that the problem is actually that this is just seen as the price of doing business, and the law is not what the politicians who are acting in these ways worry about. They worry more about what's the feedback from a popular source. Anyhow, yeah, so tricky. I don't like it, but I can understand how it came to be this way.
Oh, and what would your views on this the source be for that?
Well, once again, when you're in a place of power, how is it that you keep track of how well you're doing or how important you are when money no longer has a meaning, right? And so it becomes pursuing things which you can get away with because of your power. And that is a representation of the power with which you wield. So you can commodify sex, you can commodify people, you can commodify actions. And so it's like putting notches on your belt, but having to find new and more interesting ways to do it. And yeah, how you get around that and actually have charismatic individuals as political leaders, I don't know.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I think that, and actually that kind of reminds me. I don't know if you've heard there was an allegation that I think, oh crap, what's her name? An actress. She's famous for doing several movies. I can't think of her name right now. She was the wife of Samuel L. Jackson, I believe, in the Hitman's Bodyguard. I can't remember her name off the top of my head right now, but I guess she made an allegation that Harvey Weinstein invited her back to his place to watch him take a shower. And then I was also listening to the Michael Medved show, and he talked about that story and said that a lot of the a reason behind, men just being, oh, hey, I think that a woman will think this is attractive is just because he was a porn addict, that kind of thing, and just saying, oh, hey, when I watch these things, women are aggressive. If I'm aggressive to them, then they'll be, open to me. I wasn't. I mean, have you heard anything on those lines by chance?
No, no, I actually haven't heard anything about that particular story.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I guess maybe you're better off then. No, I think it's interesting to see the. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it is for you over there, but I definitely can see that. Of course, we've talked about the media being very sexualized and that kind of thing. Are you seeing where you are that movies, TV shows, music is becoming more sexualized kind of deal, which makes sense for all these allegations, or do you think it's kind of been more or less the same overall?
Um, I don't know how we could say it's necessarily more sexualized, but rather the degree to which sexualization becomes noticeable might be changing. Here in Canada, like our national news network, it's not like it's telenova. You don't have a weather woman showing outrageous amounts of cleave kind of thing, right? But it's also not like Fox News, where the female news anchors are clearly done up to look a particular way and are picked probably largely due to their looks as well as their skills as a journalist. So that's not something which I can say like, oh yeah, I can turn on the channel and say, oh look, over sexualization of the news. But what I can say is that when it comes to sort of backroom dealing and you get into a position of power, it would seem that there is a lot of freedom to get away with stuff that normal people would not. In Canada, we actually had a story about 3 years ago now about a guy named Jan Gomeshi. And it was a really sordid tale because women came forward and said that he had sexually assaulted them, allegedly. And when it went to court, it came out that Jan Gomeshi had been straight up front with them about saying, I'm into kind of the BDSM or at least into the aggressive type of sexual relations. And at the time, they had agreed to it. And now they're coming forward and saying that he was abusive towards them. Um, so it's one of those rabbit holes which, depending on who you're looking at and who's doing the talking and what information comes out afterwards, it all boils down to the fact that when you are a celebrity in some way, shape, or form, the rules seem to change for you. And because of that, you may be more inclined to questionable behavior.
Huh. Yeah, I think that's fair. That I think the whole, I don't know. Hopefully, some good can come of this, and we can all say, hey, you know what? When you treat someone this way, or maybe we should even say, stop being so forward. Stop assuming that, oh, hey, I saw this on TV, online, in a movie, whatever. This is appropriate for everyday life kind of deal. I mean, that just seems like the people are too much expecting, I guess, of one another and saying, oh, hey, well, I know that XYZ person is into this because I saw them do that. So you should easily be giving me the time of day and expecting me to, whatever kind of deal, which I mean, I think, and I think I mentioned this before, but it'd be interesting to have a social class of like, hey, you know what, when you walk down the street and um, try to start a conversation with someone that you're into, just remember that they don't have any reason to stop and talk to you as well. So just don't expect anything from them, kind of deal. I don't know. Would you think that we need to kind of, I guess, teach or reteach kids, people that the I guess right and wrong when it comes to their behavior overall?
Um, well, the thing is, that's what the socialization process is supposed to be all about. So not just your interactions at school, not just classes, but how your parents treat you, what your parents talk about, what your friends culture you to, what television is saying. All of these things are supposed to work towards creating a society where we have understandable rules. And I think the problem with it is that we have opposition towards the idea that we are both sexual creatures and creatures that are not completely defined by our sexual urges. And there hasn't really been found to be a middle ground within the popular media's discourse. So you can have sex positive and sex negative feminists. You can have Puritans and you can have people who are not Puritans. And what it all sort of, I think, boils down to is if we as a society can't actually figure out how we want to talk about sex and all agree on some level to the terms at which that conversation is happening, then no amount of education will necessarily make the society a better place, because it's not necessarily completely a social issue either. You have to come down to the individuals. So if you teach individuals to respect one another, then that really should carry on into other parts of their life. And I think largely it does, because even though we hear about these sexual assault allegations and actual sexual assaults and things like that, the number's going down and has been going down for a very large amount of time. So we are doing something right. It's just that when something goes wrong, it's suddenly a pandemic problem. And oh my God, think of the children, when really it should be, let's continue the course and let's see how we can continue to better relations between men and women.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That totally, I agree, and I think that I wish we had more better, better or changed our standards or what have you. But yeah, I think hopefully things get better. I hope they can't get any worse, and there aren't any more skeletons in anyone's closet, more or less. So, but anyway, I kind of now I'm kind of so on the to get off that depressing note, I wanted to change topics a little bit, and I wanted to discuss with you as well the badass news and videos of Nikki Haley. I don't know, have you seen Nikki Haley's comments towards or speech that she's given to the UN recently about, this is what we're doing, you can like it or not kind of deal?
I have, but do you want to tell our listeners about it there, AAA?
Yeah, sure. That's good. Thank you. Good idea. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Nikki Haley was talking with the UN about the I'm sorry, she was commenting on President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem. Let me make sure I say this right. To recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and got a lot of flack for that. And eventually, she's been going on about you know how the U.S. is important to the UN, how much we do, and so if you're not agreeing with what we say, what we do, then we'll make sure that if you want aid in the future, we'll write your name down, kind of deal. So been doing, and I've not seen all the videos about her, but she's definitely taking a stance, obviously being very pro US and just saying here, you guys need us, and you guys are complaining about things that we don't agree with, so either come with us or don't. And I mean, I don't think I don't know as much as I probably should about the UN in general, but it seems that we are uh, trying to or giving them too much help. Maybe they don't deserve that kind of deal, but I don't know. Have you seen or what are your thoughts on Nikki Haley's speeches thus far?
Well, it runs into the problem of what was the UN originally conceived of to do, and what has it devolved into? And so, the UN was created to replace the League of Nations, which was considered to be a dog with no teeth. And it was designed to be a place where the superpowers of the 1940s and 1950s could come and discuss what was going on in the world and try to make sure that we don't have a nuclear holocaust anytime soon. And it became far more broad than that, with the UN Declaration of Human Rights and freedoms and all the aid work it was trying to do in the creation of the peacekeepers. But the UN has always been an entity that is tolerated and used when it is useful and forgotten about when it's not. And because of that, the UN seems to have fallen more and more into a globalist sort of global government / global hegemony frame of mind, where it doesn't like individual countries exercising their autonomy. And so when the US, which is the country which is the linchpin to the UN, even though they might think it's not, says, hey, look, you can't actually tell us what to do, and you can't dictate policy to us because that's not your job, that is a very strong stance to take, and a stance which basically shows what a straw man the UN has become, and maybe what it's always been, especially given how the number of nations have actually devolved into working coalitions, the Middle Eastern coalition being one of the most prominent and most active on many levels. So I think Nikki Haley is right in saying, like, look, we fund you. you don't actually seem to do anything for us. Why should we keep funding you? And why should we be bowing down to a collective of nations who we knew would already not like this idea, especially when their own human rights records are not that great? Uh, why should we be expected to follow them at all? And now there's just a lot of grandstanding going on because the UN is once again a dog with no teeth. International organizations are great, but when they become globalist organizations unto themselves, they become more of a problem than a help.
Yeah, that's fair. I think no, I was just commenting. I think I saw a video on loudwithcrowder.com when she just said I think it was talking about the vote that they made with they did not agree with the U.S. recognizing Jerusalem, and it was I think 129 or something to like 9, and she just said, "Hey, we're taking names. If you guys need our help, then maybe we'll think twice about going down the road." And then shortly after, I saw an article. I guess there was a UN party or something in those lines, and she invited people. She didn't invite people, but going off of that, I mean, for what you just said, do you think that maybe is it a probably a good idea for the U.S. to just kind of cut ties with the UN?
Yeah, that's definitely above my pay grade. I don't know what the world implications of that would be, but I think it more boils down to the fact that what the UN was supposed to be was neutral ground. It's supposed to be kind of like The Hague, where nations can come and discuss things and turn ideas over, and their job is to manufacture either consensus or alternative points of view that will help them to affect change in the world in a positive way. And they seem to have forgotten that. So all of this starts, of course, with the US saying, we now recognize Jerusalem as the capital city, or what will be the capital city of Israel. Now, that's totally fine. The US can do that. And what the UN probably should have done, and would have been a better thing to do, is, okay, if you recognize it as Israel's capital city, can you at least recognize that it could be Palestine's capital city at the same time? So that there's a non-compete here, both sides get something, and in the process, we can work towards some sort of peaceful agreement or some sort of sharing. And in doing so, hopefully, pull some of the teeth of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, many of whom are using this as sort of political capital to try and show how evil Israel is. And that's unfortunately a topic I don't know enough about. But it is it's in no way an ununderstandable position for other nations to go, hey, wait a minute. If you do this, there will be problems. Because there will be problems. It's rather, why couldn't the UN actually have come up with a resolution that would have been workable for both sides instead of blaming one side and vilifying the other?
Yeah, that makes sense. I see what you're saying there. And to be fair, I don't know if you saw there was I think Trump's first speech when he talked about the claiming or declaring Jerusalem to be recognized as the capital. He did talk about trying to get a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, saying, hey, I want you guys to be amicable. Which, of course, I don't know if you've seen any of the PragerU videos, but one of them talked about trying to make peace agreements, and every single time they did, Palestine always screwed someone over in the end because they just don't like Israel in general. So I don't know if that would work. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, but that once again should be something which the UN points out. The UN should be the one saying, look, every time we've worked out a deal, Palestine pulls out because it doesn't seem to be to their benefit to actually come to the negotiating table as honest actors. So this is where the UN has very much been hijacked by special interests. It should be the intermediary body which is more honest than the other players coming to the table. But more and more, it is the dishonest institution which says this side is right, this side is wrong. And it's like, but based off of what? And why is it that you only look at A and not B, kind of thing? So as an institution, I think it does need a shakeup. And I'm not against the idea that the US should say, look, if we are in fact funding you, and you don't even do lip service to trying to be the neutral entity, which everyone can come to, if you actually have your own ideological bent, then there's no reason for us to fund you because we could negotiate better by ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and with that being said, do you think that there is um, well, I guess would it be easier potentially to revamp the UN, or maybe there should be no UN, or would it be a good idea to make a quote unquote new and improved UN, or do you think do you have any thoughts on that?
The major problem with that is what are you renegotiating it and redesigning it to do? And what things are you going to put in place to prevent it from becoming exactly like the League of Nations, a toothless dog, exactly like what it is right now, which is, once again, a toothless guard dog? And I don't think you can really go that way because the UN ultimately is a globalist organization. And the further we go towards globalization, the more blurry the world becomes, and suddenly you can't really think of yourself as being a member of a particular country, and you can't really think of you know, how to express your nationhood in any particular way because the supranational organization is literally trying to get rid of who you are, what makes you unique, and make a one world government. And it's like, well, no, we don't want that. We actually want countries that respect one another, talk to one another, and play nice with one another. And if the UN can't do that, I don't think any other organizations will be able to do it either. So it becomes an unworkable piece of paper that's a band-aid to a problem that has long since grown too big for it to handle. So I don't know. What are your thoughts there, AAA?
Well, I think that I like what you said about that it is a, as you said, a dog with no teeth. I think that there definitely needs to be, if nothing else, revamping and saying, if, like you said, if we are keeping the lights on, then this should benefit everyone, and everyone includes, the U.S. as well. But I don't know, maybe the better option would be to say, and this, I mean, down this road is not the best idea, so I'm not necessarily endorsing it, but just a thought. But that was kind of how things were with maybe getting different teams instead and saying, like we had in World War II, there was the Warsaw Pact and then NATO, and we said, hey, here are our teams and kind of deal, and that which was, at the time was good and bad overall. But I think if there are countries that the U.S. does help out a lot, and and those countries appreciate what the U.S. does. Maybe we should make I don't know, a better, smaller version of the UN. Say, hey, we're gonna help you guys out and protect you guys because you guys appreciate what we do. We'll pay you, and we are not going to bother or mess with anyone else. If you all want to join in and pay or all share in our in a natural goal to be safe and civil, great. If not, then we just ask you to leave us alone, and we'll not bother you, kind of deal. So it would be nice to see if I guess you think that when you're a small child, you say, hey, treat others nicely, but of course as you grow up and get more land and stuff, apparently you want to keep everything but to yourself and want to say, screw your neighbor, kind of deal. So I wish that there was a way to not necessarily be saying I like you, but I wish there was a team or a rule that said I don't have to like you, but let's just do our own thing and not have to go and run into, well, this is mine, I want to take your thing. So I don't know if that kind of group could exist. So I agree with you there, but I kind of wish that there were we lean towards a don't mess with me policy kind of deal, which I mean,
Well,
if that makes sense.
yeah, but more so the thing is there are countless organizations that are global and that are involving multiple countries and allow those countries to work, link their economies, link trade, link travel. Like we have the EU, we have the Arab League, we have NAFTA. We might end up having the Trans-Pacific Agreement going through at some point, but China also has its sphere of influence. The thing which the UN was supposed to do was try and prevent the superpowers from running roughshod over dependent states. Now, the US, to its credit, it might have an economic empire that spans the globe, but it hasn't been nearly as aggressive in its policy at taking over other countries. Whereas Russia, when it was in power, it literally conquered other nations physically and then tried to run them from back in Moscow. And so it's like it's the need for an organization that can kind of say, okay, guys, everybody needs to play nice, but at the same time, that organization can't have goals of its own, that makes it really troublesome. Because if the US isn't backing the UN, then Russia might or China might. And do we really want a China backed UN or a Russia backed UN? And from Russia and China's perspective, do they really want a United States backed UN? And what the US has is historically they're less hawkish and less conquest orientated than the other nations which we just mentioned. So it becomes really complicated really quickly. But you can't also just say, let everybody get along, because we don't tend to. So I think it's more like, how can we find those things which help us get along? And how can we market the idea of letting countries negotiate for themselves in a robust fashion and sell it to people around the world, as opposed to what the UN is offering now?
Fair enough. So maybe I say that you're more or less against the Rand and Ron Paul isolationism kind of deal?
Um, that's something which I can't really speak to, because once again, it's national differences. So what the isolationism of the US means to Canada is a problem for our economy, because the US is our biggest trading partner. The other issue for Canada is that if the US isn't there to help us, well, we fall victim to whatever Russia wants and whatever China wants. The US is the counterbalance to us. So we really don't want the US to be isolationist, but we also don't want the US to try and take us over economically more so than it does now. So it's kind of an interesting place to sit in.
No, that's fair. I mean, I agree. I don't think that. Of course, I wish we could use more resources to help, everyone in the U.S. and make the U.S. better. But that's also, you have to take into account the realization of, hey, we need trade. We have to trade with people. We need stuff that they have. There's no really getting around that. We can't do all the things by ourselves. We don't have all the resources and the manpower. So we need to definitely talk and be a part of other countries and whatever else. But I mean, yeah, I just don't. Uh, I agree. I think to your point, uh, we are spiderwebby, if you will, with other countries and states and such. It would be very difficult and poor judgment to just go, okay, you know what, guys, here's what we want, here's the deal, or in or out kind of deal. So I agree. It is very complicated to try and get out of that situation. But again, hopefully, with what she said, maybe things will change, and potentially what she said will wake up these other countries and say, hey, you know what, they're not messing around. We've been taking advantage of them for X amount of years, kind of deal. And it's just maybe it's a wake up call, and maybe things will change. I don't know. Do you think that things will change now, or it's still going to be kind of a fighting this battle head on for a little while still?
Um, I think it'll be quite a while before they can sort of work things out. The UN is a huge organization, and it actually does do good, but it's also an organization that is by definition manned and populated entirely by bureaucrats. They are not elected officials, and even those people who are appointed to positions, they might not have been elected to the position which they were sitting in anyways. So if we're going to be talking about an oligarchy, which is a family-run affair, or an affair, sorry, a organization run by people who have relationships with one another, then the UN is a very incestuous thing, and that will take a long time to get rid of. But it also has to come from both the top down, that is the Security Council, and the major powers saying, hey, we need to restructure the UN to make it something better than what it has devolved into.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, maybe this is the first step into saying, we're done. We've been paying the bill, and you've been wrecking the place for years now, and so maybe this at least brings its attention to the issue, kind of deal. But yeah, I think and good on Trump. I mean, that's the I don't know. Do you think I'm hoping that at this point maybe Trump has better ratings in the polls and whatever else. I mean, overall, I think we can both agree that he's been doing better the past month, but between policy and what he's signed into legislation. Would you agree with that?
Um, well, considering so much of what he's done has been geared towards improving the economy, it will improve the Canadian economy as a knock on effect. There will be more business being done. And from that perspective, I go, that's great. But it's also, once again, one of those weird national divide things where the idea of having centralized Medicare that's accessible to everyone through the government isn't alien to Canadians. And so we actually have the single payer thing. We all pay for our Medicare, but we can also buy private medical insurance to augment what's going on. Um, so our problems are America's problems, and America's problems are our problems. But on the whole, right now, what Trump's been doing economically is something which most Canadians should, on some level, say, "Oh, this is good. Let's see where this goes."
Oh, and with that, saying it that way, would you say that most Canadians are still kind of against more or less Trump overall, or no?
Well, the thing is, technically, our federal political party that's in charge, the Liberals, would be against Trump because, of course, he's representative of conservative elements of what's going on. Canada tends to be a far more liberal nation. And right now, I'd say, in some ways, to its detriment and to its detriment of its national character. But most people would probably say we're against Trump because he hates X, Y, or Z, which more or less shows ignorance on the behalf of the Canadian people rather than something which Trump has done that is actually untoward. And I think that's true of most people when considering politicians from other nations. We go with what the news tells us, and the Canadian news doesn't tend to be very positively inclined towards the current administration in the US.
Oh wow, okay, geez, that's interesting. Well, I mean, would you say that if I'm hearing you correctly, would you say that the your leaders are I wouldn't say leftism, but would you say that your leaders have and your news is very similar to the US news and leaders?
Um, Not really. See, this is the problem: is it's not tit for tat. So, like, our conservative party would be further to the left than the American Democratic Party on many issues. Not all issues, but many issues. And our Liberal Party would probably be where the Democrats, or at least the right-leaning, the left-leaning Democrat, sorry, yeah, they would be on the political spectrum in a different place than what you would expect if you're just looking at the American one. So it's hard to compare apples to apples because when we're talking about conservatism, generally what you're trying to conserve is a culture and a way of living. And so our conservative party would try to conserve something that is different than what, say, the Republicans are when they're trying to conserve the culture of the United States. So it's not something which lends itself to easy answers. And this is where I'd actually like to see Roaming do a video on the differences between Canadian, British, and American conservatism, as well as the differences between Canadian, British, and American liberalism, kind of thing. So yeah, I can't give you any clear answers there, AAA.
No, that's fine. Well, I guess, and if you can answer this next question, great. If not, that's okay. But in your opinion, do you think that there are a few, many, vast differences between the right here and the right there?
Sure. Our right is generally pretty much okay with public health care. Our right is pretty much okay with the idea of crown corporations and that the government should be involved in the economy. To what degree that can change, but yeah, no, the right of the political spectrum here in Canada is not pushing an agenda that says we should be skeptical of all government power. And because our political system didn't come from revolution, it came as sort of an offshoot of the British system, which the Americans vehemently rejected.
Wow, that's crazy. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you know this. How long has Canada had the universal healthcare over there?
I think it was from 1970s, I think. Yeah.
Oh, so even that's wow, that's a long time, isn't it? Jeez. Um,
Yeah, it was put forward by a guy named Oh, drawing a blank now. It'll come to me a little bit later. But anyhow, he helped to create what eventually became our NDP party. Tommy Douglas, that would be the guy's name. And he was actually a pastor. And during the Great Depression, he was very much trying to advocate for workers' rights and for giving government money to help people with Medicare and other social needs. So, yeah, it has a long history here in Canada.
That's and I mean, with your experience, have you enjoyed it, or has it been, as I've seen before in some videos, not great care and long lines, or has it been okay for from what you've seen?
Yeah, that really depends. So, what is a long line? If I go someplace and I have a shattered femur, let's say, I'm pretty sure that I could probably be forced to wait, depending on how many people are there and how I am triaged by the doctors on hand. But the thing is, they will take me in and I will eventually have surgery on my leg. And I would expect to have very solid care and a follow up and physio included in my medical treatment with no major changes in my medical premiums, kind of thing. So that's that doesn't seem like an onerous amount of wait time. Whereas if, say, we were to go to, let's say, Zimbabwe, for example, and I were to go to a clinic and I have a very treatable thing, but they say, well, we can't get you in here for 2 days, that would seem more onerous kind of thing. So it's hard to compare because it's like if you went to a hospital there, AAA, would you expect to be treated within at least 8 hours of arriving?
In the US, yes.
Yeah, and that's the same here in Canada. So it's not necessarily a better worse. It's just where's the money coming from and how is it being allocated? And that's where we can get into some discussions about whether or not our current system is the best financially, sorry, the most viable financial option that we could come up with.
No, it's fair. Well, I mean, so overall, with that being said, would you say that do you like, I guess, the U.S. right more than Canadian right, or do you kind of think there's good and bad in both, or I guess what's your opinion on that?
Well, I've never had an experience with the American medical system, but the problem is we always hear of you get, a broken arm and it costs you something like $30,000 because you didn't have medical insurance in the States. You get a broken arm here, and what does it cost you? Maybe a couple $100 for the cast and stuff like that, but you're not financially indebted by what went on there. On the flip side, in Canada, you do have long wait times for elective surgeries. So, say you have a herniated disc, you might be on a wait list for something like 6 months, maybe a year, before you have the operation. Whereas in the States, if you had the money, you could, of course, go to a private clinic, pay the amount of money, have your private medical insurance cover it, and actually be treated faster. But that doesn't go for everyone. So, there's trade-offs to either system. And if you're a poor person, let's say, then Canada, I would argue, has the better system for you, even though you might have to wait longer. If you're a middle class or wealthy person, the American system has a lot of benefits because you can expect good care at a relatively low wait. So it really depends what you want to get out of your medical system.
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. I guess I should have clarified that. I meant what do you think? Do you like in general overall the Conservative Party in the U.S. or the Conservative Party in Canada? I guess since you say there are pretty big differences, do you like, I guess, the non-government the conservative government thing, or do you think that your Conservative Party is pretty right on?
That's hard to tell right now. The Conservative Party in Canada, at least on the national level, is a bit of a non-entity and has been since Stephen Harper left office. But if we're going to say things about Stephen Harper, there's a lot of people who would say negative things, but he was good for our economy. There were things which he wasn't great for, but that seems to be the case for most politicians. And whether or not the economy is something which you can say was his doing or he was benefiting from other things going on in the world, that's harder to determine. And I don't have the information in front of me to say. So for me personally, if there was an election today, would I vote conservative? Well, I don't know. They'd have to convince me. Would I vote liberal? I don't know. They'd have to convince me. So I'm definitely a fence sitter, and I don't have strong opinions about which party needs to be in power. But I do have strong opinions about what I'd like to see them push in terms of their policy.
Interesting. That's hey, actually that brings up so over there. Then are you saying that it's if there was a I guess you guys get along better on. So if there's a conservative, they are easily open to talking to a liberal over there, and vice versa. Would you say that's pretty much the case?
Um, no. Our politics, when it comes to election time, very much mirror a lot of the American politics, but individual actors besides the heads of the particular parties don't get a lot of play. Whereas there tends to be a lot more focus on the leadership races within the various parties in the States. In Canada, not so much. And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that in Canada, the head of our government is the head of the party with the most seats. That's how you elect them. Whereas in the States, technically the president could be Republican or Democrat, but they're not considered the leader of either party, right? They actually have to negotiate with the head of the Republicans in the House and in the Senate. They can't dictate what they do. At least they're not supposed to. Whereas in Canada, the prime minister can literally say, you vote this way, and expect his party to vote that way because he is the prime minister.
Interesting. That's well. I'm sorry to hear you guys are as can be as divisive as us because I really don't like our system and how it works there. But actually, with that being said, are there? I mean, I know for us at least, we have the left, right, and extreme right and left, and up and down liberalism, or I'm sorry, libertarianism, that kind of thing. Are there? Uh, of course, you guys have liberals and conservatives in Canada. Is there a emerging third or fourth parties over there, or is it basically just those two?
Oh no, we've had many parties for quite a few years now. The Liberals and the Conservatives are the parties that have been in power traditionally, and they tend to alternate either between between terms or after long standing of one or the other. But we have the if we start on our right, on the national level, our most right-leaning party is our Conservative Party. Then after them, the most right-leaning party is actually the Bloc Québécois, and they are actually a separatist party that wants to get out of Canada. Then, as you get to the center on the Canadian political spectrum, then you get the Liberals, and then on the left you get the NDP and the Green Party, and those are Canada's national parties. So it's odd because we actually have way more on the left end of the spectrum than we do on the right end of the spectrum.
That is interesting. Wow, that's pretty crazy. That's and are you I guess registered as a conservative or a liberal at this point?
No, I see no need to register with a particular party because I don't support the party because I don't think the parties in and of themselves represent any greater good or any greater evil, but rather I want to see what their policies are and whether or not they have a plan which seems to make sense for implementing them in a way that will be beneficial to Canadians. So I am not aligned with any particular party, although I would probably sit more towards a center left on the American scale than I would towards a left-leaning person on the Canadian scale. So it's a bit odd that way because if you asked what are things that I would like to conserve about Canada, if we're talking about the Conservative Party, ironically, at least maybe ironically, I would say things like marriage between two men and two women. Like it's like that's something I want to conserve because I see that as a good part of the Canadian society. Whereas if you were to go to the States on a federal level, you'd have conservatives rolling over in the aisles just hearing that. But at the same time, it's like I would also like to conserve Canada's national identity as being Canadian, English speaking, and French. And here in Canada, that would be considered a very controversial stance to take. So it's a bit odd.
Interesting. That's just, well, and sorry to keep going down the rabbit hole. That's the is there a so I take it the conservative wing in Canada is very anti-gay. Is that what you're leaning or
No,
saying?
no, no, no. I'm saying that they wouldn't be. They absolutely like they would try and conserve that we have put this into law. They wouldn't try and revoke it. So it's like, as I say, in Canada, our right is far more left than your left.
Interesting. Well, and I guess so. Would you say that the Canada has been benefiting a lot from same-sex marriages, or does it really matter at all?
Huh, I don't know. That's not something which I've seen statistics on. But what I have seen is that people who get married seem to get divorced a lot, and that holds true for people who are heterosex and for homosex in their partnering.
Interesting. That's also. I mean, would you? I don't know if it's what it is in Canada, but I do know that the quote unquote statistic for the U.S. is half the marriages end in divorce. So would you say that that might be the same case in Canada?
Now let's check. So according to StatsCan, only about 38% of our marriages end in divorce.
That's pretty good.
Uh, nice. Haha. And we could probably break that down and other stuff like that. But it is different. And that's where it becomes kind of hard to say, where would Canada be on X or Y issue in the United States? Because if you're trying to say that it's an apples to apples comparison, it's not. And we're probably closer aligned to what the Australian and British political systems are like, and in terms of the expectations of their citizens, in terms of what the government provides, than we are to the United States. But we have had a really long-standing and very workable relationship with the United States, and you guys have even forgiven us for burning down your Capitol building back in the 1800s.
Well, you guys just are just the best, aren't you? That's crazy. Um, no, that's good. I'm glad it's nice to hear the it's cool for me to hear the how everyone else in the world is viewing the U.S. since we feel I feel like right now every other day is a dumpster fire of we make a decision and someone hates it and therefore it's the wrong one kind of deal. I don't know if that's how you guys react to your political or your politicians' decisions, but I mean that just seems the trend of X person cannot get this thing right. Only this other, person I like is good. Therefore, let's go. And the end of the world is here. We're all gonna die. I know you talked about before that you're very divisive over in Canada, but would you say that the news and politicians are as um, dramatic, I guess, as the ones over here?
Um, Not really. And that can boil down to the fact that our biggest single news agency is owned and run by the government. So it's not a open market on news. We have one Canadian government-owned agency, and then we have CTV, which is partially owned by the government, as its competition. And most local news networks either are affiliated with CBC or with the alternative through CTV. So it's not quite the same, but we do have programs that seem to borrow a lot from the American host-driven, personality-driven kind of take on the news.
Huh, well, guess you guys are well, don't copy us too much because we're not the best example of efficiency, if you will. That sounds pretty crazy. But anyway, no, I appreciate. I don't want to keep grilling you on Canada, but I find that very interesting to see your take on things and again an outside viewer to how things are going in the U.S. But anyway, I wanted to end on something more uplifting, Christmassy, of course. Um, I don't know again how the traditions and cultures are over there, but of course next week we have Christmas here, which is supposed to be hopefully very very good with the gift giving and everything going on there. I know that there have been some attacks in the news recently with people trying to, or certain illegal aliens trying to go and do a mass murders that have been thwarted every now and then. I wasn't sure, and I know, or I'm not sure. I guess do you guys do Christmas similarly to us over there, or no?
Um, well, I don't know about the mass murdering thing,
Oh, that's
but
good.
yeah,
Okay, good.
most people they get together with their families, they get a Christmas tree, they eat turkey, they practice pseudo-Christian rites that they may or may not be aware of. And they're also practicing on a pagan holiday, which they may or may not be aware of. So yeah, it's a time to come together, and it's not radically different. In fact, Canada's take on Christmas and what it means in terms of family and in terms of gift giving are very much lockstep in with what the United States is doing, just because we've been so close for so long. Although I might posit that our Christmas dinners are slightly less over the top than some of our American counterparts.
So it's just would you say maybe it's just a nice dinner then, or?
Oh yeah, turkey. Depending on what your family does, maybe ham kind of thing. But it's Christmas, and here we have things which people will say, oh, it should be happy holidays or seasons greetings or things like that, which seems to be par for the course for most nations here in the Western world. That's like, do we acknowledge that it's a religious thing? And what does that actually mean in the wider context of our culture? But yeah, like, what's your Christmas like there, AAA?
Well, for example, this Christmas I am going to my grandparents' house to celebrate the year with my family there. Gonna go gift give and that kind of thing. My parents, or I'm sorry, my grandparents live a state away, so I get to go wake up at the crack of dawn tomorrow and drive over there, which will be a bunch of fun, and I enjoy the values and the festive times. Unfortunately, personally for me, my family is a bit dramatic, so I like to go and say, "Hey, how's it going? I'm alive. Things are going well. Okay, goodbye. See you next year." 'Cause that's more my thing. But no, I agree. With our Christmas, we're a bit different there. We have our Christmas Eve meal is the big deal, and then a Christmas Day is kind of just the open presents to relax. We're a little bit low key on. Um, how that celebration goes, but we have a pretty big meal, a lot of ham, cranberries. It's Thanksgiving-esque, if you will. A lot of nice things. The desserts, big deal, kind of thing. We've got. I think we do gift giving with my aunts. Is the big night for Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day is the my grandparents and my family. We all get together and try to have fun there. And then of course working shortly afterwards, so I've got to head back home. But I don't know any special plans for the family with you.
Yeah, no, just Christmas dinner with friends and family, and we'll see how it goes. And eat too much turkey and hopefully fall asleep not soon afterwards.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So would you say then that and you in Canada it's still celebrated on the 25th as well?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think it's celebrated on the 25th in most of the Western world besides Russia.
Oh, okay. I was under the impression that you guys have the are you guys the ones that do Boxing Day?
We do Boxing Day as well. Yep, big sales, big shopping.
And is that so big sales, is that like out would that be kind of equivalent to our Black Friday slash Christmas kind of sales or
Um, Usually they're better than our Black Friday sales because they just want to clear out what's left in stock before the new year. But yeah, no, it's a shopping day.
interesting? Okay. No, I've heard that it was the I was under the impression Boxing Day was the just giving gifts. I'm like, sounds like Christmas, but yeah, but it's on a different day. And I'm like, so they celebrate Christmas on a different day? It was very confusing when I heard about it the first time. So I just never got a clear answer on that. But it's I mean, good that you guys get to go shopping, I guess. um, but no, I mean that's good. But and unfortunately, yeah, I as I was saying before, I know of a few um attacks that have been happening over the Christmas season thus far, which thankfully many have been thwarted and whatnot, which is sad to do. But I also um there is a in the U.S. right now we are having kind of the war on Christmas where that's the oh well it's the belief in this quote unquote person and now or everyone's kind of taking that in context of okay well if you're not or if you are religious you're bad or if you're not you're bad kind of deal. I was just curious are the holiday season and that kind of thing is it as polarizing do you think as it is in the U.S. right now or everyone kind of says okay Christmas is time for Thanksgiving sharing kind of deal or we'll leave it at that.
Um, I would have to say this year, I haven't noticed too much about the idea of war on Christmas or turning Christmas into a completely secular holiday. But in the past, people will make noise about, oh, we should divest the day of its religious connotations. We shouldn't even celebrate it. But yeah, no, this year I haven't followed it all that much, and I don't know if that's just because it hasn't been in the news or I just haven't been watching at the right time. But we do have that sentiment of war on Christmas, war on traditional holidays, especially traditional Western holidays, and it does crop up here from time to time.
Well, yeah, hopefully it's not too terrible. I mean, I do think it would be nice if we could all kind of come together and say, hey, we have our differences, but we're here, we're happy, we're married, we're gonna appreciate each other and kind of deal and not be so divisive because that doesn't really get much of anything done. But that's really pretty terrible there. And hopefully, well, I don't know. With that being said, is there same kind of coming together with New Year's as well?
Yep. Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Like, essentially, the only days which we don't celebrate in common is you guys don't celebrate November 11th as Remembrance Day to the same degree that we do, and we don't celebrate Veterans Day or Columbus Day or any of the particularly nationalistic holidays. But we celebrate Easter, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Thanksgiving at a different time of the year, and we also celebrate New Year's.
Gotcha. Okay, forgive my ignorance. The what was the November 11th?
Remembrance Day. So that's when we celebrate the signing of the armistice for the First World War, and we remember all of the people and all of the soldiers who have fought and died for freedom and for Canada since then, kind of thing. So it's
Wow.
like, yeah,
That is, I mean, that sounds like something they should have more often. And it's just so it's just World War One, nothing World War Two wise then.
no, 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 it's everything since World War One. So World War One,
Oh,
World War Two, the Boer War, the peace initiatives, the Afghan War, the like, so all of those.
well, curse my American education. I actually didn't realize that was November 11th. That's kind of crazy. So is that just the day off kind of deal, or is there anything special you do on that day, or
Uh, we all go to, or we try to go to, a thing called the Cenotaph, which we meet at usually about 10:30, and 11 o'clock we have a minute of silence, and there's usually vintage planes flying over, and there's veterans who are dressed up, and they place wreaths at the bottom of the cenotaphs. So yeah, it's usually a pretty somber day. It's not supposed to be this happy-go-lucky holiday. It's a holiday to remember that freedom is something which we've had to fight for, and it's not something which we have freely. It's something we have to work to continue to maintain.
that is crazy? Well, hey, I appreciate that's learning more stuff about our culture and our differences, which is pretty great. But anyway, I think we're gonna have to about wrap up here. We've talked a lot about taxes, death, Christmas, and other things. So thank you for joining me again, Duff. I appreciate that. And to YouTube, I will see you guys next time. So Duff, we can say goodbye, and we'll see you guys soon.
All right, see you later, guys. Merry Christmas.
All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks.